Okay, we're back in the Gospel of John now, and we're going to, first of all, take a look at some of the things we learned last week. Now, let me explain just a little bit about the approach of the class that we're taking from now on. Up to this point, we've been studying the Gospel of John. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they tell a few things that the Gospel of John tells about. So we've been skipping them and just looking at the Gospel of John. But now then, when we get down into the Garden of Gethsemane and all the way through the trials of Jesus and his death, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all going to tell what they understand about that event. Now, anytime that you have four people who are witnesses to one event, and all four people tell the same story, they are going to add some events. It's not a contradiction. It would be like if four people walked out the door this morning and they saw an automobile accident. Red car hit a blue car. So the police come, and they would say, we get the testimony. One guy would say, well, I looked up and I saw this red car coming down the road pretty fast. And all of a sudden, I saw the blue car, and bang, they hit head on. Well, okay, pretty short. What did you see? Another guy said, I saw the same thing. I saw the red car coming and hitting the blue car, and I looked up there, and I saw the red car, and it was coming so fast that it was fishtailing just a little bit. Wow, that's pretty fast. And I looked down and I saw the red car trying to pull off the side of the road. Well, we got a couple of new things. They'd ask another, what did you see? Well, as I looked up, I saw the blue car coming. It was coming really fast. And I looked out there and I saw the guy had a cell phone looking at it. Oh, there's another little bit of information. Now, there's no contradiction, but you've got to take the testimony of all four of these witnesses, and then the police would put it together. And they would say, now what happened is the blue car was coming down the road at a high speed, so fast that it was fishtailing. And the guy was reading a cell phone as he came, and the blue car was trying to get out of the way, and you put it all together and you get your story. Now, that's the way with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. To understand what all went on with Jesus out in the Garden of Gethsemane, as they take him in and he goes through his trials, as they put him to death, we have to read all four accounts. Now, all four accounts, most of them are going to be just the same material. But once in a while, one will throw in a little additional information. That's how we're going to approach this. I'm going to approach it by looking at all four, and we'll be looking, and there'll be, I don't know, 100 different verses, I guess, that we're going to look at. But as we look at these events, I'll say, now here is John's version, here's Mark's, and here's Matthew's, and then I'll point out with colored letters the new things that we read in there. So when we get through, we ought to be able to kind of put together the whole story to see what actually happened to Jesus. But now, here we have the Garden of Gethsemane. Last week we learned these important things. We'll not spend really time on them. But Jesus went out and he was so sorry, he said he could die. He prayed to the Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Now, it was possible for Jesus not to die. Jesus later said he could pray to the Father would send 12 legions of angels, but it was not possible. You see, there's something that is not possible with God. And you say, well, I thought the Bible said all things are possible with God. It is, but there's some things not possible. The same Bible that says all things are possible with God says it is impossible for God to lie. So, let's just understand what he's talking about. if it is possible to do the right thing, to be in harmony with the will of God, then please don't let me die. Well, the situation is this. Unless Jesus dies and sheds his blood, justice in the eyes of God demands all people will be lost as the result of their sin. So it is possible for God not to have Jesus to die, but it is not possible for God to take Jesus away, not have him to die, not having to shed the blood, and still save all mankind. That's impossible, because God tells us that is necessary to be done. So, he is praying, and God now is going to leave him and let him suffer through this. And it says, then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. We don't know what the angel said. And being in agony, now these are important words, because if you're in agony means that you are twisting. It's not that you're just in pain, but you're agonizing. And that's where Jesus was. So he prayed more earnestly. And then his sweat became like drops of blood. And we pointed this out, that science has certified that they have about 100 different cases that they can substantiate where humans have been in such excruciating pain that their sweat actually came forth as blood, that blood came out the sweat pores. So the medical profession says it has to be excruciating for this to happen. Only 100 cases that medical profession ever knows about. Well, Jesus is in agony. He's excruciating pain. Now, Judas comes, and Jesus asked him, he said, in the army, who are you seeking? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. He said, I'm he. So he admitted, I'm he. And then we pointed out just a little tidbit of information. It's kind of interesting, not important at all, none whatsoever. But Judas also stood with him. In other words, here's the thing that I'm pointing out. Here comes Judas with this big army. He is so important. He's going to show them who Jesus is. He's been paid 30 pieces of silver. They're all depending on him. The whole army going to depend on Judas. He's going to lead them out, and he's going to point out Jesus. But when Jesus saw them, he said, who do you seek? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. He said, I'm he. And there stands Judas over there. Judas hadn't had a chance to point him out. Judas is not even necessary to the case. How do you suppose poor Judas felt about that time? Here it is. This is what I'm saying. It's not important. But it comes back on Judas that Jesus didn't even give Judas the pleasure of pointing him out. So then he said, well, I'm he. And then they all drew back. Then he asked him again. He said, I have told you that I am he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way. So there's these 3 times. Jesus said, look, I've told you I am he. Now, if you're after me, let these 11 men go their way. And they're getting ready to flee. Then Simon Peter, though, before he fled, he pulled his sword, struck one of the men, and cut off his ear. Jesus put the ear back on and told Peter to put the sword back up. So that's what's been happening. Now then, today, we look at the next major event. This is where Judas came with a detachment of troops from the Levitical army or temple guard. This would be the Jewish army. The Jews had their army to protect the temple and so forth, and they also came with many Roman soldiers. So you got the soldiers from both armies coming out to get Jesus out there in the garden. And that's when he says, I am he. They all drew back. We looked at this last week then, that is in there. So look at the last statement down there. Peter cut off Malchus's ear, and Jesus then put it back on. He told Peter, put your sword up. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? That's a big statement. He has been praying, Father, if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. There was no other way. Either Jesus dies, sheds divine blood, or man is doomed to an eternal hell. There is no other way. And so when it comes right down to the fighting, and Peter is drawing his sword and ready to fight, Jesus tells him, put it up. Shall I not drink the cup? Shall I not go through the misery, the pain that my Father has appointed me? We've got to carry out the divine will. So he's willing now to pay the price. Now Luke adds some more information to this. As you can see, Luke tells him that then Jesus here and Judas meet. And Judas drew up toward Jesus. I often wonder if you were there and you could see this. How it must have been as you looked at Judas. Now, he's taken the 30 pieces of silver. He has told him, the one that I go up and kiss, he's the man. Now that sounds kind of odd to you and me for a man going up and kissing a man, but they didn't shake hands in those days. When they met, they would go up and kiss, and you see them on TV, take their cheeks and touch their cheeks and kiss the side of their cheeks, and that's been the Oriental way of greeting instead of shaking hands. So in our culture, we would say, Judas would have said, now the man that I go up and shake hands with, he's the one. In other words, the guy I go up and greet. So there stands Judas. He's been exposed. Jesus has already said 3 times, I'm the man. But now Judas, he's going to earn his 30 pieces of silver. He comes to Jesus. And as he comes to Jesus, he said he went before him and drew near to Jesus to kiss him. That's to greet him. But Jesus said to him, before he ever let him kiss him or greet him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? How would you have felt if you'd been in Judas's shoes? He's already been exposed. Now then, Jesus tells him what he's doing. You're coming up to greet me. Are you betraying me with a greeting? Like you love me? Like you respect me? Is that how you're betraying me? And well, I just can't imagine how Judas felt. Now I want you to hold that because we're going to look at Judas. He's going to be coming down the line again. So it goes ahead and it says there, he said he touched Malchus's ear and he healed him. And then he looked at all the troops, all the soldiers. Now how many there were, we don't know. The wording that he uses here for detachment or cohort, that group of people had 555 soldiers in them, according to the Roman army. Now, did all 555 come out? I don't know. Or did they just send out 200, part of the troops? But there was a vast number that came out. So Jesus now has exposed Judas. Now he turns to all of these troops. And remember, they've been so scared that they backed up and they fell down. And now then Jesus is going to make them search their conscience. He said, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? That's what they had. That were their weapons, swords and clubs. He said, when I was with you daily in the temple, you did not try to seize me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness. So he said, now you soldiers, you've come out here armed to the hilt. Many of you full of swords and clubs, and Judas has been exposed, and now you've come out with this, and you come out against me as though I were a robber. He said, but when I was with you every day in the temple, you didn't do anything. You didn't try to seize me. In other words, there wasn't any cause. Why is it now that you've come out at this dark, dark hour in this dark garden to arrest me? You didn't do it back there in Jerusalem when I was exposed. I was there all the time. And not a single attempt was made to seize me there. So he said, I'll tell you why. Because really, there wasn't any reason to do it. These guys knew there wasn't. They knew that that is true. He said, but this is your hour. This is your opportunity and the power of darkness. Evil. Nothing righteous about it. They knew this. Everything about this is cowardly and wrong. And Jesus is making them think about it. That's all I want you to see as we look at these things. That Jesus, they didn't just come out and take him in as sometimes we think. When they came out, he exposed the traitor. He did something to knock them to the ground. He caused them to think about their evil works and about Judas's evil works. And now I'm ready to go with you alone. Well, Mark tells about the same story. So we're not going to read all these verses, but here's just a little tidbit of information that Mark tells. He said, now his betrayer had given them a signal saying, whomever I kiss, he's the one. Seize him and lead him away safely. So here's the plan. Mark says it didn't work out according to the plan. Here's the plan. Let's go back. Jesus is in the garden. The plan is we paid Judas 30 pieces of silver. This man, our hero, he will lead the army out. We'll get out there and he'll go up and kiss him. And when he kisses him, we'll grab him and bring him in. That's the plan. That's what this says. But it didn't work out that way. When they came out, Jesus exposed them all. He exposed Judas, and he exposed the army. And so he told them, he said, let these go. And then I want you to notice one other thing down in verse 50. When he told the army, if you want me, let these go. Then said they all fled, or forsook him and fled. Now he's foretold them about this. As he was coming out to the garden this night, on the way out, you remember he told them, this very night, you'll all be offended in me and flee. And that's where they, again, adamant, I will not. Every one of them, I will not. But Jesus said, you will, in order to fulfill prophecy. One of the prophecies was that they would be scattered from their shepherd. The sheep would be scattered from their shepherd. So away they go, all 11 of them. Jesus is alone. Now this next little thing down here is from Mark. He said, and a certain young man followed him. Now I want to stop right there. Because everybody who really has studied their Bible much has concluded this certain young man was Mark himself. Now Mark is going to talk about what he did. He doesn't say, and I was with them. Your Bible writers do not present themselves forth as major characters in the story. John is an example of this. You remember, he calls himself and the disciple whom Jesus loved. Instead of saying, and I was sitting there on the right hand of Jesus, and I turned around and I talked to Jesus, and Jesus told me, and then he just said, and the disciple whom Jesus loved, ask him. And leaves it that way. James, when he writes his book, had he been like I am, he would have bragged. He'd said, I, James, the brother of Jesus. That'd give you prominence, wouldn't it? But he says, James, the servant of Jesus. Now here, undoubtedly, is what Mark is doing. Instead of saying, I was a young man, and I was so prominent that I followed them out, he just said there was a certain young man. How did he get in there? It was probably, this is a guess, but it's a pretty good guess. We're told in the book of Acts, owned a house in Jerusalem. And it could well be that these men in the Passover supper they've spent there was around there or in that house. And Mark's there, and when they left and went to the Garden of Gethsemane, he just sneaked out and went with them. Anyway, he's there. That's all we know. Now, here's the other thing. Having a linen cloth thrown around his naked body. So he had gone out, and he hadn't prepared himself with full dress of underclothes and all this. He had been there. He grabbed this robe, I guess we'd call it. You've seen them on TV since the Eastern world has come into play so much. He grabbed this robe and just threw it around him. And that's all he had, was this one covering of this white robe. So he's out there, which is enough. It's fine. But having a linen robe thrown around his naked body, and the young man laid hold of him, and he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. So these other men left. Here undoubtedly is Mark. He's a young man anyway. And he's getting ready to leave. But there's another young man that grabs a hold of him and grabs a hold of his garment. And it's the only garment he's got on. He just sheds it and takes off running naked. Now, however you want to take that, I guess it's your sense of humor would determine it. You might say the poor kid, the poor young man, embarrassed, all this. I can't help but laugh. This actually happened. It's not a part of the crucifixion. It's not important. We don't even know who he is. But he's a young man that was there, and he's so scared, he's so terrified, that when the 11 apostles ran, he took off, they grabbed that robe, and he's so scared that he ran back to Jerusalem naked. Now, as I say, that hits my funny bone. That's humorous. He was scared. It kind of sets the stage a little bit. And this is the thing I want us to see in the study. It sets the stage. Instead of saying, okay, let's see now, 1, 2, 3. Jesus went to the Passover supper and he did this. He went out to Gethsemane, and out there in Gethsemane, why he did this. And then they came out and they arrested him and did this. Then they came in. It's not just a bunch of facts. This really happened. How did those men feel? What went on in their mind? They walked out on that hillside into the garden absolutely, totally confident. I will not. If everybody else forsakes you, I will not. And now then, they're scared to death. They are so terrified, they took off. And this young man is so terrified, he ran back naked. You see, this is an event that actually happened. So now then, these guys have run, totally terrified. They have Jesus now in tow, and they're going to take him back. That's what we find in these things. Now, the next major event was arresting him and taking him to the high priest. That's what they were to do. The high priest and Sanhedrin had paid 30 pieces of silver. They're going to arrest Jesus and take him back and give him to the high priest. That's their job. So now, we start out again. We're going to go back into Jerusalem, and we're going to see what happened. Jesus is getting ready to go through a series of trials. He's been arrested. He's back in Jerusalem. Then the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him, and they led him away. Now there's your detachment of troops. That's the word I was talking about a little while ago. A detachment is 555 people in a Roman army. And the captain and officers of the Jews. How many there were? You can see, I don't know. So they arrested him and they led him away to Annas first. So your first trial is going to be in front of Annas. For he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Now this is an interesting thought. I should look at this. It goes ahead and it said, now Caiaphas was the man that advised the Jews that it was expedient one man should die for many. We've studied that, so we'll not talk about that. Same Caiaphas. Now, according to Jewish law, you had one high priest. Only one. But now you had come down to this period of time in the Roman government where the Rome ruled the world. And here's your Jewish nation, and they had a high priest, a lawful high priest, one that had been selected from the previous high priest, one that is supposed to be the high priest. And that high priest that was supposed to be was Caiaphas. But Annas, they took him to Annas first. Now, I got it backwards, so excuse me. Annas was the high priest. Annas was the man who was supposed to be the high priest according to Jewish law. But the Romans were mad at Annas. And so they told him, the Roman government, you're no longer the high priest. We're going to put another guy in there. We're going to put your son-in-law in there, Caiaphas. So Caiaphas will be the high priest. Now, if you were a Jew, what would you do? Would you tell the Roman government, okay, we'll accept that, and violate the law of Moses? Or would you say, nope, we're going to take our sword and we'll kill the whole Roman army? Nope, you can't do that. They'd have you all dead in 5 minutes. So what they did was this. Rome said, from here on, as we're dealing with the Jews, we'll only deal with Annas and not with Caiaphas. We'll only deal with Annas. So as far as Rome was concerned, Annas was the man. But the Jews said, well, regardless of what Rome says, he's not the man. Caiaphas is the legal God-given, authorized high priest, and we Jews will recognize Caiaphas. So you see, that's how you come up with two high priests. You only have one, it's Caiaphas, but the Romans said, no, we're going to have another, and that's Annas. So now, in comes the Roman army and the Jewish army. So they bring Jesus in first to Annas. He's the guy that could speak for Rome. He's the guy that the Roman soldiers would go to. So they're going to take him to Annas first. Later they'll take him to Caiaphas. But now this first trial will be here with Annas. So they're going to bring him over, and he's going to stand before Annas. Now, while he's standing there before Annas, the next major event will be the 3 denials that took place while Jesus was being tried. So while Annas was talking to Jesus, out here, these 11 disciples start floating back in. John came back. There wasn't any problem with John because he was a friend of the high priest, and he knew him and he knew the people around him, so they let him in. And then finally Peter came back. And John goes and tells them, he said, Peter is a friend of mine, let him in. So they let Peter in. So now here we have Annas sitting up here on a chair, judging Jesus, standing there. And over here is John and Peter, sitting by a fire. And that's where we close this morning.